Hi all, welcome. It's good to see everyone, Docomomo and new people coming to our lectures. I'm Aris Konstantinidis, I'm a member of the Docomomo UK, and a big thank you to the Hellenic Center for hosting the event today and for organizing with us. I hope we have more events to organize in the future. If you haven't been to any of our events before, Docomomo UK is the British chapter of the international organization documenting and conserving the modern movement. And we organize a rich program of monthly lectures, campaigns, and tours in the UK and Europe, continuing the ideas that were central to the modern movement. Today's lecture on Dimitris and Suzana Antonakaki's work came as a reflection after 3 lectures that Docomomo organized on Alison and Peter Smithson, the British architects. So we thought it would be interesting to have to look more in detail on the work of another architectural couple that was influenced by modernism. Dimitris and Suzana Antonakaki are about a decade younger than the Smithsons, but they worked in parallel. They established their practice, as you mentioned, at 1966, and they worked up until a few years ago. They were heavily influenced by modern architects like Corbusier, Aldo, Eyck, Tim Ten, and of course Greek architects, Dimitris Pikionis and Aris Konstantinidis, the most important 20th century architects that I'm sure Stelios will show us more in detail. And their work is mainly around residential projects, single-family houses, and multi-story apartment blocks, polykatikias in Athens, as well as hotels and country houses across Greece. They were influenced by vernacular settlements as well, so they combined the principles of modern new movement with vernacular Greek architecture, focusing on movement and pathways between the building parts. They gained international recognition with exhibitions and lectures in the UK, Netherlands, and Switzerland. Once Kenneth Frampton included them in his book, Modern Architecture and Critical History, and he also edited their first monograph. Although it's difficult to separate the work of an architectural couple, Dimitris and Suzana, we propose today to focus the lecture specifically on Suzana Antonakaki, on one hand because she died recently, a few years ago, but also to celebrate a female architect, because women are often marginalized in architectural history, and specifically within modernism, there are only a few known examples. Suzana was a very significant architect, in my view maybe the most important female architect in the post-war Greek architecture. She had a very sensitive approach, referencing arts, philosophy, and poetry in her work. She had an intrinsic talent in sketching, interior decoration, colors, materiality. She was writing in weekly newspapers about architecture and public space. And today's lecture marks also the occasion of a recent publication with her text that Stelios Giamarelos, our speaker, has edited. So we thought it's the perfect opportunity to invite him and learn more about this important architect. A few words about our speaker. Stelios Giamarelos is an associate professor in architectural history at the Bartlett School of Architecture at UCL. He has over a decade of career in architectural publishing and holds a multidisciplinary background in architectural engineering, history and theory of architecture, as well as history and philosophy of science and technology. His research extends in the 20th century Greek architecture, and his PhD has been published by UCL Press under the book Resisting Postmodern Architecture, Critical Regionalism Before Globalization. He's the author of an extensive number of publications, as well as the editor for different institutions and organizations like the RRBA, the European Network for Architectural History, the Bartlett, and the Crete University Press. Lastly, in 2008, he was the co-curator of the Greek national participation in the Venice Biennale. Without further ado, Stelios Giamarelos.
Okay, thank you, Manoli. I'm I was very much looking forward to this talk, but I think I'm losing my voice. Hopefully my strepsils will help. But first of all, I want to thank Tokonomo UK for kindly inviting me to do this, and especially Manuel Venerakis, who was driving the whole process behind the scenes, but also Robert Plotter, Elki Mursali, Nadia Yakumaki, Atelier, Grace Strassen, and Happy Harmani for making it all happen here at the Hellenic Center. I also want to thank Dimitris Antonakaki and Rafael Aveiro for the work that is currently underway on the Atelier 66 archive, and without them I would not have been able to retrieve the images that you will see on the screen tonight. Many thanks to Evason Peripheral too for the strepsils, and for everything else that has enabled me to be here with you today. And of course, thank you all for joining me to discuss the work of Suzana Antonakaki. I thought the best way to introduce her to you is through a short video excerpt from a Greek documentary film of the late 80s. So let's just do that first. I don't know that much about houses. I know that they are type of their own, nothing else. First in the beginning, like the kids playing with the sunbeds of the countryside. They weave colorful shutters and shiny doors on the day. When the architect finishes his work, they shrivel or they smile. They even become spiteful of those who left, or those who stayed, or the others who would return if they could, or those who got lost now that the world has turned into an endless hotel. I don't know that much about houses. I recall their joy and their sadness sometimes when I stop. Houses become easily spiteful when you strip them bare, you know. The house by the sea. The house is a universe. It is the ground and the sky, the entire cosmos. In the house, we cultivate our sensibility. This is where memory resides. In the house, space is linked with time. This is where time and space come together. Space becomes place when it is combined with time, a familiar place. And when we talk about one's proper place, we do not refer to property, we refer to the friendly relationships that one has to cultivate with the space of their life. And the space of life is the house. Is the most celebrated Greek female architect of her generation. Her work in the context of Atelier 66, the collaborative practice that she established with her husband Dimitris, and their peers in 1965, was globally celebrated as exemplary of critical regionalism. Alexander Tzonis and Liane Lefaivre interpreted their work as a combination of the architectural legacies of, on the one hand, Aris Konstantinidis and his very systematic grids, and on the other, Dimitris Pikionis with his more thoughtful, contemplative, playful also, pathways around the Acropolis. Kenneth Frampton, when he wrote about their work, also underscored the connections this had with that of Corbusier, for example, or Aldo. Indeed, all these architects played an influential role for Suzana and Dimitri. Pikionis was their mentor during their formative years in Athens, and Eyck and his wife, Hani, shared their enthusiasm for his work. This is from a visit in Athens in 1981, and this is the only other couple of architects that has slept in the bedroom of Bernanke Street, which you will see later. But you can find more about this history in my previous book, which is freely available as an open access PDF, no need to pay for it. But if you want to pay for it, I have also secured some discount codes for anybody who loves hard copies, the smell of it, of them and so on. So you can get it for with a 20% discount if you use that code on the black square value of the bottom. Anyway, today I want to do something else. I want to focus more on Suzana's own distinctive architectural approach, which has been less discussed in this context. And to do so, I have organized my talk around excerpts from autobiographical interviews that I was lucky enough to have conducted with her a decade ago. So, Suzana and Dimitri encouraged the collective approach to architecture. They worked with peers from different generations who eventually joined them at Atelier 66. This platform for collectively producing architecture worked as a relatively stable collective or collaborative practice. About a dozen architects were involved. Now there are some kids in this photograph, so there seem to be more than that. But the group was more roughly, let's say, a dozen architects for 2 decades. They worked together until the mid-80s. And the office was well known for its kind of flat hierarchy. So no matter whether a young student was just entering the office after they had graduated, or whether it was a more experienced architect, they all worked together with sharing the same resources and also splitting any sort of commissions and the money they got from competitions and other stuff equally or between them. And so at Atelier 66, both architecture itself and the effort that was required to produce it were collectively shared. The office effectively worked as a small family of architects, and indeed many of them were lifelong friends or family members. The collective structure of Atelier 66 reflects Suzana and Dimitris' conviction that architecture is not an individualistic pursuit. On the other hand, as architectural historian Suzana Antonakaki has noted, critics tend to focus more on, the talented individual, the star architect, rather than all these kind of collaborative practices in which many women architects tend to usually work. So, and from another side, something that Manuel also mentioned, the critical appraisal of the work of other creative couples in modern architecture, so, Ray and Charles James, Alison and Peter Smithson, or Aino and Aldo, rarely underscores the unique contribution of the women creatives to the final result. Conversely, and like Denise Scott Brown, Suzana was an easy target for criticism. She was frequently on the receiving end of criticisms that attributed anything that was perceived as negative in the work of Atelier 66 would attribute it to her. The blame was usually on her for what some critics might have called the postmodern turn, which supposedly derailed the more still work of her more kind of modernist, minimalist husband in the 80s. And this turn was usually evidenced by excessive ornamentation, which stereotypically is considered to be a kind of female priority in architectural design. Large-scale projects like this one on Crete were also criticized for the exquisite attention to the minute design detail, a trademark of Suzana and Dimitris architecture. And the critics were saying that this was more like domestic rather than public space. So again, maybe there is an implicit kind of gender stereotype in this critique that women are better at designing domestic rather than public spaces. But, Suzana was a very strong woman. She did not cave in to such unfair critique. And on the contrary, she was really an expert that aimed to transmit architectural knowledge as widely as possible. In the difficult years of the rule of the Commonwealth, so from 67 to 74, when Greece was under dictatorship, Suzana translated Le Corbusier's discussions with students, and something that she felt had a very important political gravitas for that moment. But Suzana also delivered numerous public talks, as Anolis mentioned. We've just been able to gather them with Dimitri and Rafaela and other people who worked in the archives to publish them as a collective edition. It's a book which is about 600 pages long, with the 30 most important public talks that Suzana gave throughout the 60 years of her architectural career. And she also regularly wrote about architecture through her she had a personal column in one of the most popular Greek newspapers, Tzonis, and she was doing that for more than a decade. And I guess something that is significant to note for Suzana is that her prose was pretty straightforward, accessible. She really cared for non-expert audiences. And I guess this was the result of Suzana consciously cultivating her discourse, both by designing and building, and by reading and writing. In a way, she was a lifelong public intellectual for architecture in Greece. Suzana's interests escaped the confines of architecture, as Manolis also mentioned. These interests freely extended to literature, philosophy, and the fine arts. In her mind, all these different references were not siloed in their specific knowledge fields of origin, but, and this is really evident in her writing, more than half of the authors that are mentioned in Suzana's talks and lectures, they are not architects, they are not historians or theorists, they are usually poets, philosophers, novelists, philologists, painters, cinematographers, musicians. And I think this is something that Suzana was trying to do. She was always striking a balance between her artistic and architectural references, and in that way, somehow she is a cultural good. Architecture and the fine arts are communicating vessels that commonly shape and contribute to the cultural production of human communities, in Suzana's mind. In her own words, she was saying that she opened up, and I quote here, to readings that are not directly related with architecture, because she wanted to find, and again this is from an interview we had together, she was looking for ideas and descriptions that concern life and the environment in poetry, literature, art, in theoretical texts from different knowledge fields that might touch on architecture. She believed that all the fine arts, and I quote here again, and especially architecture, should be approached with knowledge and sensibility. Readings serve as a solid basis for approaching the design process with reason and with dream. That is a favorite quote of Suzana and of Aris Konstantinidis. It is coming from the Greek poet Dimitris. Now, Suzana was reading all sorts of books, but despite all these, the variety of references, she did not stop being an architect when she was reading. And this vocation, the vocation to architecture, effectively pervades everything that she does. And this is why she believed that theory and criticism are not separable from design. And any external reference could only become theory for Suzana only if and when she could make it into a diagrammatic sketch in which she could condense a clear architectural idea. Now, whether that thought or idea was about spatial typologies or vernacular segments, or whether that it was about the existential gravity of, let's say, the staircase as a bridge that connects the earth with the sky, the mortals with the gods. This is all of that was included in your thinking, in your drawing, and in your readings. And there are all these books. If you open them, shuffle through the pages, you'll see many notes on the margins, and these notes always show how architecture remains central in your thinking, even when she's reading, a philologist's account of acclaimed novel, like James Joyce's Ulysses, for example. Her thinking goes both ways as it attempts to correlate the worlds of architecture and poetry. And she had a few favorite authors. There are a few books that she reads all the time because she believes there is a special relationship, for example, that thinkers such as Paul Valéry retain with architecture. And I quote here again, I frequently refer to his book, Eupalinos or the Architect, because I find in it this directly poetic gaze that motivates the imagination in architectural theory and practice. In his book, The Soul and the Dance, refers to the relationship, movement and space, while his dialogue for the tree reminds me of Le Corbusier's encomium of the tree symbol. In his discussions with architecture students, he puts forward a research workshop in which the building will grow like a tree with its roots, its trunk, its leaves, its flowers, and its fruit. Its program and its proportions will allude to the eternal values of architecture and the relationship of the earth with the sky. And in her own texts, Suzana handles the words and ideas and phrases that she lifts from other authors with the same flexibility and dexterity with which she combines different materials and their different colors in her architecture. She did not shy away from quoting phrases from her readings by heart, even if she ended up changing the order of appearance of each sentence in the original. The thoughts, the ideas, the words of the others are therefore assimilated, they are incorporated as structural elements for your own thinking, in the same way that laying a brick on top of another eventually produces a wall. Emancipated from the original context, the concepts that she borrows from others underpin Suzana's poetic architectural approach. And all of your texts use these references to address theoretical questions based on her built work, which could include relationships between space and time, materiality and representation, ornament and color in the architecture of the city, dwelling, verticality, the significance of boundaries in transitions, thresholds in architecture, the poetic conception of everyday objects or the poetic conception of the built environment, architecture as part of the cultural continuum, or the relationship between place, architecture, and the natural environment. Now, like many architects who were associated with critical regionalism or with any label that anybody ever tried to put on them, she was not entirely happy with the word regionalism for its kind of conservative connotations. But for me, I think it's interesting to look at Suzana's world as and her way of thinking as something that would also enrich the discussions of critical regionalism. Because I believe that somehow her non-architectural references are kind of additional voices that expand ways of thinking that have to do with critical regionalism. First of all, like Frampton, Suzana refers to both Le Corbusier and Martin Heidegger in almost equal measure. Like Tzonis and Lefaivre as well, she also refers to Bertolt Brecht, but instead of focusing on the alienation effect or defamiliarization, as Tzonis and Lefaivre, the concept that they use as central for the critical regionalist approach, Suzana was actually more interested in something like the short account for the theatre, and the texts where Brecht is actually talking about his method of composing and of working to create a new piece. And so she used such texts to really reflect differently on her creative process. Something else that I think is interesting in her readings is this idea that reverie is a significant part of thinking about and envisioning architecture. And in her texts, she builds on an understanding of literary composition and criticism, which allows her to further elaborate on the design process. Another very important author for Suzana is the Gaston Bachelard, and these are probably the three most cited books that she used to refer back in her lectures. But perhaps even more personalized and characteristic for Suzana's approach, for example, The Poetics of Space is a book that, other architects who are tangentially related with critical regionalism, like, Johanni Palesman, for example, it's a kind of main reference for them as well, but I think none of them ever tried, like Suzana, to build parallels between architecture and literature, and especially these are the 6 points of Calvino's memos for the next millennium. And these are supposed to be informing the way in which somebody should be writing literature in the 21st century, but Suzana tried to translate these concepts into how they helped her to think about architecture. And I guess something that Suzana also worked very much on, and is not part of the discussions of critical literature so much, is this question of time in architecture. And I think something that is maybe important in Suzana's approach is this idea that, when she, for example, traces the spatial typologies of vernacular settlements across Greece, she acknowledges that time in architecture has a kind of duality. There is a dual temporality in architecture. So, for example, when we walk through a building, we simultaneously activate spatial relations that come from the past. As in, we move along the lines that have been designed and realized in situ before we arrive. But on the other hand, this same architectural space also belongs to our present, the present of our movement within it, and in this way it is also activated according to the cultural conventions of the now. And realizing this dual temporality is probably even more significant when we move out of the individual building and we go out and about on streets, public spaces, where we can see how the image of the city is composed by architectures of different periods. So maybe Suzana's critical regionalism could also be interpreted as this constant and conscious engagement with the dual temporality of architecture. For Suzana, architecture was really a way of life. She did not reject any invitation to give talks or coordinate student workshops within and without Greece. But her public presence was not aimed at self-promotion. Suzana was concerned about architecture in the wider sense. She wanted to promote the cause of architecture, the cause of highlighting architecture, of caring about architecture, as one of the highest goods, as an artwork, as something that is close to the peak of human civilization, as it were. She was very politically active in the Association of Greek Architects. She directed the architecture department, the architecture sector of the Technical Chamber of Greece in the mid-80s, and she was the Greek secretary of the Union Internationale d'Architectes for 2 decades. So she was really a public intellectual who spoke up in defense of architecture, and in doing so, she intended to really activate latent institutional processes and developments. She really believed in institutions and in their capacity to ensure a sense of continuity in efforts, that are not cancelled by the next government or something. And that was going both ways. So that was going both to the state-led measures for architecture to protect the built environment, but she also intended for institutions to be able to cultivate the architectural sensibilities of the Greek public. Well, I guess it's not surprising to say that most of her visionary plans did not materialize, but I think her programmatic intentions at least attest to her unshakable belief in the power of collective work and the important role of public institutions for architecture in Greece. And her big plans included establishing an archive of modern Greek architecture, curating thematic and monographic architectural exhibitions and lectures across Greece, organizing exemplary architectural competitions on the design of public space and the image of the city, coordinating lifelong learning seminars and workshops. And these incentives demonstrate Suzana's honest concern for the architecture of everyday life. Her aspired social role was that of the architect civil servant, and this is a publication that came out from the Technical Chamber of Greece with her team at that time, where it's called the housing guide, let's say, and it includes all sorts of practical information about the design of apartments, the logic of an architect in designing an apartment, and in a way it is a good sign of how she believed that through her professional expertise she could help the Greek public to improve the environment of their daily life. Now, moving finally to buildings, because Suzana's unique contribution to build projects also awaits to be further underscored. Her strong presence first in Atelier 66 was really immediately perceived as a pleasant surprise by several of her female colleagues who used to be students of Dimitri in the School of Athens, and they had idolized him, but then suddenly they entered the office and they found a very strong, very active, very inspiring woman who was running the office, and so she was really a role model for them. She kind of embodied the role model that they were missing in Greek society. And it's true that Suzana took most of the crucial decisions in the office. She actively defended her architectural ideas with drawings and arguments. Now, when it comes to her personal works, we could say that we can probably read them as variations on Atelier 66 most celebrated architectural ideas and practices. And I guess a good way to summarize maybe this approach to architecture is by looking at the apartment building on Penaki Street in Athens, which we will visit together straight away. So this is a film by one of the Atelier 66 architects called Alzheimer's is trying to hit me. Yes. Okay, so the year is 1978. And we are obviously in Athens. It does not look that different these days. This is pretty much the city. We are on top of Stelios Hill. The building that we're going to discuss is at the bottom of the screen, around the middle now. But you were not supposed to look at it now, because now we're moving towards the Acropolis. But this is the landscape of the city, and you can see how it is an urban landscape which is comprised by the polykatikia, the apartment buildings of Athens, which are usually 4 to 6 stories high. And they have a very, as you can see, they're almost identical. They have a very clear structure and layout. But this building is slightly different. And this is Suzana and Dimitris Antonaki's own apartment building. Their office is on the ground floor, and their flat is on the first floor. And one difference that is already apparent when you look at it from the outside is that there is no typical floor plan. You can actually, as you go, as you walk down that street, you can actually look up, and because every floor is kind of a bespoke piece of architecture, and every flat is a bespoke piece of architecture, you can tell where your house is without counting the floors as you would do in a typical polykatikia, where every floor is the same balcony. But here you can see how the elevation is kind of sculpted with all these kind of different volumes that protrude. And this is already something that looks different from the kind of anonymous polykatikia of Athens. Our guide for the day will be Aristides, the architect's son. He's now maybe 16 years old, in 1978, and he's going to enter, and he enters the apartment building. Again, this is an open-air space, not an enclosed space. It is not dark, it is cross-ventilated, And it is almost a continuation of the street. And we are now one level up, and we can see how that space that Aristides just entered is visible. You can look at it from many different ways and from all these windows that are around it. So it's almost like a bit of a theatrical stage. So Aristides picked up the mail or something, and he's going up to enter the flat of Suzana and Dimitris. And again, through this bridge you can look down. That's where the camera was in the previous shot. So here we are. We've entered the flat. You can see a flight of stairs going the other way on the right, but maybe it's wiser to turn left. And this is the dining space, and the kitchen at the back. And you can see how there is always like a short flight of stairs, like 3 or 4 stairs, that gets you to a different level. This is the window from which one could look down, and this is Dimitris looking at that space before. He can work here, and suddenly the space changes. It's becoming higher. It's a double height living room, which we're going to see in a moment. So this is the other side from where Dimitris was standing. And still this is going up this flight of stairs, a few more steps, and we are in that living room. Like Aldo and Eyck, Suzana and Dimitris believed that the flat is almost like a small city. The house is like a small city, and this is, if it is a small city, then this is the plaza or the public square of the space. The living room is the public square, and it is not only the public square, but it is really like a village of the Greek islands, where the old women are coming out of the windows and speaking to each other. This is Suzana and Dimitris' bedroom, and the master bedroom of the house. So another flight of stairs. Aristides goes up there, and there is this kind of bridge. So this is from top, obviously from the top. And again, it is, let's say Suzana and Dimitris' bedroom is the first house of this city, then Aristides and Katerinis, the children's bedrooms, on the other side are the other houses of that little town. And there are all these details and all these objects that refer back to the fireplace or special configurations of traditional vernacular settlements of Greece. This is the master bedroom from the other side, where Aldo van Eyck and Hanni van Eyck were sleeping as well in 1981. And then, as Aristides crosses that bridge, he can enter the other boxes, Katerina's bedroom, and he's going to his bedroom. The yellow door is a toilet. And this is what this bridge looks like from Dimitris' office. So there is always, I mean, it's difficult to capture it on camera, but this is a space there's light coming from both sides. It's cross-ventilated, making the sense of these spaces kind of much more open, I guess, than what you're seeing on the screen now. So this is Aristides. He got his stuff, and now he's going to leave. So he's just going down the stairs, and he's going to find himself in that bit where, in the beginning, as you entered the apartment, there was this flight of stairs that was going the other way. So essentially, there is this kind of loop that goes through the apartment, and this is what makes it this is part of the labyrinthine clarity, I guess, that critics have used to describe this sort of architecture. Okay, so I think you got a pretty good idea of what the architecture is like. Now, moving back to Suzana, this is a building that Suzana designed right after the other apartment building was complete, and it is a personal project of hers. It is her personal project, and essentially it is really an architectural experiment to test whether the Benaki Street model could be repeated under different conditions. So, what was really unique about the previous project that I showed you is that there were no contractors and no developers involved. Basically, the 4 families who live in that apartment building, they were friends or family members. They knew each other very well. They had close ties. One of them was a lawyer, and she did all the paperwork for the residents to form a consortium through which they would really manage the production of the building. One of them was a structural engineer, so he did all the stuff that had to do with heating, ventilation, all that. The architects provided the design for that, and another family had the land and the capital for building part of the building. So it was really a collaborative project between friends and families who enjoyed close ties. Now, the question was, could this alternative to the commodified production of anonymous apartments where nobody knows who's going to live there and they're going to be sold to somebody, could that model be replaced with this consortium where the people who are going to live in this place get to know each other in advance and they co-design, co-produce the building without any intermediaries? That was the big challenge, I guess. And I guess this is a crucial question not only for modern Greek architecture at large, but also for the very viability of critical regionalism. If critical regionalism is this strategy of resistance to the commodified production of the built environment, then is there a way to do this? Is there a way to do this even when these people do not share the same friendly or familiar ties with those of the Benaki Street projects? Could this experiment really be applied at an urban scale? Or were the contractors right to accuse Suzana and Dimitris of elitism? As you can see, the project went on. Suzana always said how many difficulties she encountered with four owners who did not really know each other or trust each other as much as the other families. But I believe there are it's not easy to answer such questions. And maybe this is precisely what renders this project even more significant than the much discussed apartment building on Benaki Street. But I guess when we go back to the work of Suzana, maybe this project is only the tip of the iceberg. Because her personal works unexpectedly elucidate many more significant aspects of Atelier of Atelier 66. This is Logothetis family house in Varkiza, probably the culmination of Suzana's personal trajectory in designing domestic spaces for specific clients. And still, even in this limited field of residential project, one could focus on the sensibilities and variations that emerge from Suzana's personal projects. So, for example, this could include the ways in which her design interventions enter into dialogue with existing buildings in vernacular settlements over time. For example, we could think of this project, a family house on Indra, where, again, if you can imagine yourself walking through this building, you can again see how a street from the outside with this flight of stairs is repeated on the inside, and then as you go up again, you're exiting that path and enter from the other side as well. So there's always this kind of movement in the work. Or what else do I have here? Yes, the single family house on Tzonis, which is more like an adaptation of an existing building on it. You can also think of Suzana's focus on specific design aspects, included the interior configuration of refurbished or new projects, original design projects by Suzana, such as this, the British family house in Eyck with this kind of slightly domed concrete structures that unify the living room with the dinner table. There are other more complex projects that Suzana led, like these two houses in Drafty, which are also interesting because they show us how Suzana also experimented with her means of architectural expression. So, the vividly colored sketches, which reflect the kind of strong sensory impression of her architecture, and these, for her, I think, were as important as these kind of more precise drawings of construction details, which guided her trusted craft people on site. This is Stelios Giamarelos, one of her most trusted craftsmen through. She worked with him for several decades. And I guess there are also projects like this one, an office building in Lefaivre. We were not used to discussing the work of Atelier 66 in this kind of building typology. So we usually talk about the residences or the houses and the apartment buildings. But I think there is also this overlooked part of their work, which is also probably the meeting point of the central contradictions maybe that go through transverse their work. For example, this relationship between private, commodified space and free, open public space. So maybe some of these rarely discussed buildings really hold important keys in fully understanding Suzana and Dimitris' architectural approach and probably its limits. And the same goes for early works. This is a public space project that Suzana designed in Thessaloniki, in Hagia Sophia. She was pregnant when she was designing and realizing this in 61. But again, one could start thinking about how the spatial configuration, circulation on different levels, the general design principles that underpin this project, this early project, could foreshadow later proposals for the public space of Greek cities, like maybe culminating in the redesign of Corbusier Square in Athens, one of Suzana's favorite projects, which was unfortunately and sadly recently demolished. Now for Suzana, foregrounding these projects and acknowledging their value was really significant. Again, I've said it again, it was not because she believed that she deserved this kind of self-promotion, but she believed that if architecture was recognized and acknowledged as important, then that would build a kind of trust that would enable her to propose alternative solutions that would unsettle existing stereotypes, as she told me in one of the interviews. So public recognition was significant only in as much as it cleared the way for bolder architectural experiments, and it could also mean that there are higher chances for them to be built and preserved. In other words, Suzana pursued the recognition that would enable her to put her architectural poetics in practice, and through her built work and not just through her words and texts. So, I opened this talk with Suzana and Dimitri in their mid-50s, visiting a house under construction. I'm going to close it with them again, 16 years later. Now they are in their early 70s, and the two architects revisit one of their most important projects from 1969, which is the mine workers' housing complex at Distomo, which in 2004, when the video takes place, it stands derelict and abandoned after the mines closed down in 1997. And we can see what they have to say. wasn't it good to come here? I don't know. We were somehow prepared that we would not see that which we had originally designed. After all, because architecture has different angles, from a distance, up close, very close, from the inside, from the outside, with people, without people. Now that we are looking at it from a distance, after having visited up close, I think we did achieve something. This little, very minor thing. Do you have grandchildren? 4 grandchildren. 1 girl and 3 boys. If you wanted to tell them a story about 1969, what would you say to them? Me? Sadly, I'm not great at storytelling, and this is not very good. But I would tell them that this was a period in which we dreamt of many things, because we hoped that something would change afterwards. Things did not really change, but that is life. It does not change easily. I mean that things did not change as significantly as we had hoped for. But this is how it goes. As Suzana was just saying, continuing to live and work is only worth it when you persist. That's all. And with this last smile from Suzana, I would like to thank you very much.